it is working. And I have my daughter here who's going to help me say hello. No.
Hi.
Anyway, I'm going to be responding to Desmond Morton's chapter, The National Policy, and answering 3 of the questions coming out of the Canadian history curriculum in Manitoba. And the one I'm going to answer, the first one: why did the Métis resist the westward expansion of Canada, and what were the consequences? And the chapter National Policy that Desmond Morton writes, he writes a lot about the 3 prongs of the national policy and how those manifest themselves in the time following his second election, and how that sort of developed Canada, industrialized Canada, and brought immigrants, particularly to Western Canada. Not so much as we see after the turn of the century, but certainly a significant amount, particularly from the United States and Western Europe. But I think what we see with the Métis in what is now Saskatchewan in 1885 at Batoche, at Frog Lake, and it's quite interesting that the Bella Batoche documentary played last night on CBC. I don't know if you saw that. But the Métis are basically repeating what happened in 1869, 1870, where Canada comes knocking and says, you know, we want this land, we're going to develop it. And quite frankly, you're not really people, and we're going to push you off of it. And Gabriel Dumont, seeing this happening, goes down to Montana, gets Louis Riel, and says, hey, come on up, we need you to help out. And but there's a difference in a couple of differences that Morton points out from the Red River resistance, in the sense that, number one, there is a Northwest Mounted Police, and there are forces out there able to be sort of sent out to that area of the world, partly because there's a railroad. The railroad is being developed at that point. But also, Canada does in fact own that land, whatever that might mean at that point. In the Red River resistance, there was sort of some ambiguity, given that the HBC hadn't quite sold it to Canada at that point. And so it's actually quite a tragic event. And when you look at the third question, which deals with, like, how did Canada deal with, or how did relationships with First Nations and Métis and Inuit change after Confederation? I think there was a more hardline stance from the John A. government, and there was we see that when the treaties are signed and under duress, because John A.'s starving people basically on reserves to get them to sign certain treaties or move on to reserve land. That there's a real aggression. There's a fundamental aggression against the Métis and Indigenous people, and there's a real desire to assimilate them, but also just get them out of the way. And I think that maybe have carried through to the 20th century, and might even still exist today in 2014 to some extent. Anyway, that's sort of what I took out of that chapter, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on what you took out of that chapter as well.